Hello, once again, everyone. I'm meteorologist Sean Sublett, and welcome to Across the Sky, our National Lee Enterprises weather podcast. Lee Enterprises has print and digital news operations in 77 locations across the country, including in my home base in Richmond, Virginia. And I'm joined by my meteorologist colleagues across the country, Matt Halliner in Chicago, Kirsten Lang in Tulsa, and Joe Martucci in Atlantic City. Quickly going around the horn to see how everyone is. Kirsten, let's start with you. How are things in Tulsa?
You know, Sean, they're pretty good. It's a little bit on the chilly side. Temperatures are about 10 degrees or so below average right now, but we're warming up for Memorial Day, and we just got off the PGA Championship weekend, which was a hit too. And so things are good in Tulsa. Can't complain.
Yeah, I would imagine that was a very, very big deal there.
It was.
Matt, how are things there in the Midwest?
I'm still processing that it's already Memorial Day. I mean, this year is just flying by. I mean, I say it every year, but it just seems like every year goes by faster than last. There's just so much going on, so busy. The weather's been so active too. I mean, so many rounds of rain in the Midwest, and I tell you what, with most of these rounds of rain comes at least a small severe weather threat too. So certainly been staying busy here, and we're again struggling to warm up as well. We've been getting some teases like summer's here, but then we cool back down. But now with Memorial Day weekend, boy, it's really starting to settle in. It's like, wow, whether, the temperatures want to cooperate or not, summer is beginning.
Yeah, Matt, and just to let you know, because I got a couple of years on you, man, it gets faster every year. I just want you to be aware of that. So let's come back to the East Coast. Joe Martucci there in South Jersey at the Press of Atlantic City. Joe, I know you and I have been kind of stuck in the low clouds for a fair bit. It seems like more of May than we might like, although we have had a couple of hotter spells. How are things there on the Jersey Shore?
Well, it is Memorial Day weekend, and we do want to remember everybody who died while serving the armed forces.
Amen.
But is there any one place in the United States that celebrates Memorial Day weekend better than the Jersey Shore? The answer is no. It is the opening to summer. The beaches are filled. People are coming back down the shore. Last year on Memorial Day weekend, Sean, it was pouring, it was raining, it was flooding, and there were still 1 to 2 hour lines to get in everywhere at the shore. People love it. So it is Memorial Day weekend. We are feeling good here at Jersey Shore.
A rainy day at the shore or the beach or whatever your favorite nomenclature is better than a sunny day at work. But as we do get into Memorial Day and what we think of as the traditional start of the summer vacation season, we've got meteorological summer starting on the 1st of June. That's also the beginning of the Atlantic hurricane season. We've talked a lot about tornadoes the last couple of weeks, but now we do want to turn our attention to hurricane season with summer just about upon us. So our guest today is Joel Cline. He's the Tropical Program Coordinator at the National Weather Service headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland. That's just outside of Washington, D.C. He previously worked 9 years at the National Hurricane Center, including a forecaster during Hurricane Andrew in South Florida. He was part of a team which completed a service assessment of Hurricane Michael from a couple of years ago and is now leading efforts to improve a variety of National Hurricane Center products, including better ways to convey forecast uncertainty. Joel earned a bachelor's degree in meteorology and comp sci at NC State and a master's in meteorology and physical oceanography at the University of Miami. Joel, despite you putting that little U up with your fingers, we would like to welcome you to the Across the Sky podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I enjoy this.
Wonderful. First off, tell us a little bit about how you got interested in weather and how you decided to go the route in meteorology as a career, and then a little bit about what your work entails now.
So the way I got involved with meteorology, like most meteorologists, I was very young, even before first grade. I developed a cough. I wouldn't get sick, but I developed a cough before it would snow. Every time. I grew up in the North Carolina mountains. And so people would refer to me as a little weatherman. Is it going to snow? Is it not going to snow? And everything. And so went to the library, got a book. As I say, this is before first grade, How to Build Your Home Weather Station. And me and my dad, he's a farmer, we built a weather station, put it in the backyard. And then I like geography. So I took notebook paper and I drew the lower 48 states every day. And I had my stack of notebook papers in the United States. And so I would go out, take my little weather ob, and then come in and put where I thought the H's and L's and the fronts might be on that chart. And then I would watch the 6 p.m. news and see if I was right. And so just kind of, it was just something fun to do then. But then it was like, after you get through high school, it's like, hey, what am I going to do with my life? And it's like, what seems pretty fun. I could get paid for doing something that I really think is fun and enjoyable. And so went and did that. When I was at NC State, also worked for the professors in the meteorological lab and got to learn a lot more there than in the classroom by asking professors one-on-one. And then started a project out at the Weather Service Forecast Office in Raleigh at that time. And then we had a couple of big hurricanes. Gloria was a big one. They hit the North Carolina Outer Banks during that time, and I got the bug for hurricanes. The bigger the storm, the more interesting it was to me. And so I really got into tropical weather, and first job moved down to the National Hurricane Center. And so the rest is in the bio.
Exactly. Well, speaking of that, what's your research and what's your kind of day-to-day, career like now? Obviously, you have this very deep interest in tropical meteorology, hurricanes, tropical storms. What kind of projects are you working on now? Because I'm assuming you're not really in the operational day-to-day forecasting space anymore, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm not in the operational forecasting space anymore, but I have to deal with it on a daily basis. And so the job is really 2 6-month chunks, if you will. The first one for me that we're still in is it goes from the week after Thanksgiving, where we have a big conference at the Hurricane Center to internalize what went right. What can we do better this past hurricane season? What were the things that just failed us or whatever? And were there problems presented or things we need to work on? Because we've got 6 months to June 1st, and things have to be done by June 1st. And what that means is more than people expect. So that's the busy time, because once you define what went wrong, you got to figure out how to solve it. You got to do that quick. And people have got Christmas vacations and that kind of things that they go on. But you got to hit the ground running, because does that entail a computer program change? Who's going to do that? We got to get that done in the next month, because we also have to tell everybody, not only in the United States, but we have to tell the media, we have to tell our forecasters, we have to tell all the countries in the Caribbean, the 31 nations down there, make sure that information can get disseminated, test it to make sure it works right, before we put it out, announce it to the world. And then, as I say, make sure it can go out to the communications lines and get everybody trained. And that may be our forecasters, that may be emergency managers, that may mean media, it may mean Coast Guard, Navy, it may mean other countries. So we've got to get all that done by June 1st. So it's a busy time of year from Thanksgiving to June 1st. It's nonstop. Okay. Plus, I'm in charge of outreach and the training aspect of things. So there's no shortage of interviews, speaking conferences, that kind of thing, for preparedness, to get people to take notice, like this program does, leading into hurricane season. What do I need to do? How can I be prepared? Just move to the coast, or this and that, and what can I expect? And what does all this information mean? And so you've got to get all that done by June 1st. And on June 1st, hurricane season starts, and that becomes a different aspect of my job. That's almost like, oh, I get to breathe a little bit. So now you're waiting on a storm to develop. And if there's a storm that looks like it's going to make a major impact to the United States of America, I get a call from the Hurricane Center. I pack my bag, I get down the plane, I go down to Miami, and I help work with interviews down there on the hurricane specialist unit, and try and help them out wherever I can. As I say, I used to work down there 9 years, so I know a lot of the people, and they don't have to babysit me. I can go and do a job, and I'm a helpful person, not somebody who's just getting in the way.
Yeah, I'm sure it's almost like you probably never left. I remember I was down at the Hurricane Center once in Miami. It's been a number of years ago. Bill Reed was the director then. And I still remember one of the things that surprised me, and this is probably '09 or 2010. He said, actually, we're busier when it's not hurricane season for all those reasons that you just said, Joel, because there's so much preparation to do that once once hurricane season does show up, you can start putting all those plans into action that you spent 6 months developing. So with that, let me just ask you this. After it being a relative, and everything is relative here, quieter time through a lot of the 90s, the early aughts, and even the very early teens, it's gotten very active here in the United States regarding tropical cyclones these last 6-7 years or so. So what have been the big communications challenges you've seen really come to the forefront in these last few years with the Atlantic basin, if you will, becoming more active again? What kinds of messages do you feel like we still need to really push so that the public understands the full complement of the risks that are coming along with tropical cyclones?
That's a great question to lead in there, Sean. Thank you very much for that. It's all about the impact, right? So if you were to close your eyes and take a room of 100 people, 1,000 people, and ask them, think of a hurricane, what do you visualize in your mind? And it's usually the wind, right? But there's so much more for impacts to a hurricane. There's the rainfall, there's the inland flooding, there's a storm surge, there's a potential for tornadoes. If you're on a small island down in the Caribbean, there's the landslides as well. So there are many potential impacts that can be extremely harmful to your life, your property, that you need to be prepared for. And then people look at this, the categories of hurricanes that we have, and that's all that is. It's just a measure of wind, but people don't understand, and rightfully so, what does a mile per hour, whatever it is, mean to me in my house? So back a long time ago, there was a meteorologist and an engineer got together and they created this category scale for hurricanes to say, when it's category so-and-so, this is what could happen to your house. And so that's why that going. It doesn't tell about the other impacts, and it's all about the impacts to get you related. So one of the main things that we like to talk about in the off season and for preparedness is, that scale doesn't tell you all the threats, all the risks to you to make a decision. You go down to Houston, Texas, and you ask them about, Harvey, that it was just a 2 or a 1, and so it wasn't a major hurricane. And so what happened there? Well, you had over 4 feet of rain. Or other examples, you got Florence hitting North and South Carolina there, that was coming in as a 4, but made landfall as a 1. And so it's just a 1, and that type of thing. You get people, as Joe was talking about earlier, going down to the Jersey Shore, no matter what the weather is. Well, suppose there's a hurricane that's not making landfall and it's just a fish storm. It's out in the Atlantic Ocean. Well, there's rip currents along the shore, and we've lost people the last several years because the storm was so far away. And yet we created those the strong waves and rip currents that took people's lives. So, it's the impacts. It's not just a number somewhere or whatever. It's, what does this mean to me? And so that's one of the big things that we went through. Another little important aspect, when you do look at the wind speeds and look at the damage for it, and you look at the big category 5s, and I'm a bit of a hurricane nerd here. That one of my bucket lists, and I've done this, is go to where every Cat 5 made landfall and get me right there at that spot. So I've been to all of them. But when you look at all the Cat 5s that have hit the United States, and there's only a handful, right? Ever, only a handful. That when you look at each one of those, 72 hours before they made landfall, they were all tropical storms. They were just a tropical storm. None of them were yet. The average time when they became hurricanes was about 50 hours before they made landfall. That's not a lot of time. And then they wound up making landfall as a Cat 5. So one of the big areas that you talked about, where's research going? It's how do we communicate these impacts better? Another one is the rapid intensification of storms and getting better at potentially, trying to wrap our heads around that and forecast those types of things of, is it going to be a rapid intensifier or not? And when is that going to happen?
I have so many questions here just being along the coast. And you bring up the category scale. I mean, and you talk about the Jersey Shore. Well, how about one that wasn't a hurricane when it made landfall in Sandy back in 2012? And that causes, we're still talking about that today and the communication, the impacts, from a storm that wasn't a hurricane, but brought probably the most damage to the Jersey Shore we've seen in recorded history. Here's my question, though. When it comes to the Saffir-Simpson scale for hurricanes, is there any research being done on changing that to account for rain, storm surge, and wind, and not just wind, the wind field throughout the whole storm? Given, real-time data we have now, I think we could probably calculate accumulated cyclone energy in a fairly rapid basis. Is there something out there? I know that's a heavy question to start off, but want to lead off with that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that easy one there, Joe.
I figured just get out of the way first.
Yeah, I'm just picking with you. But no, a couple of private companies have gone into doing their own scales that try to encompass everything. But we're not looking at that because we feel it may add confusion to the message, right? And no matter what a scale is, the message is what are the impacts going to be to you? And so we try to do that. We started storm surge watch and warnings in 17. We've got inland flood warnings and trying to get the message out better. One of the things that we have looked at and is not complete yet, but will be in this next calendar year, and in this calendar year, is I think we've done something a little bit better. We've gotten social scientists on board our team. And so we've had them look at our graphical products, look at the way we say things, and how can we communicate better to where the public and the users of our information, be it graphical or words or text or whatever, understand and have a better understanding of what it is so they can better know their risk from these impacts and better know what they should do then at that point. And then, of course, you had COVID hit on top of this. You tell people to evacuate to a shelter. Well, now, do they go to a shelter because there's COVID? Am I putting my life at risk because I go to a shelter and there's all these other people in there? Or do I stay home, or do I go somewhere else, or whatever? So the messaging is big. And as I say, we're doing research on that and looking at a lot of things, and the impacts are what we're trying to stress, and less of the categories. So no, we're not looking at adding more numbers to it. We're hoping people pay attention to the message. And we're also moving from, and we've done this in the tropical field for longer than in other aspects of the Weather Service, probabilistic information instead of a deterministic information. You get a forecast, in Richmond or Tulsa or Atlantic City or Chicago, and it's all, the high today will be 81 and low tonight will be 56, and it's bing, 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 point forecast, and the winds are from the northeast to 9 a.m. at 10 miles an hour, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, hurricanes are, a huge risk and a small probability. So of hitting you and causing damage. So when it does, it is a big risk. So we use probabilistic information to say, this is the best we can do, but there are things that we do not know. And we haven't shied away from that as a tropical field and letting people, and I think people really appreciate that so that they can make better decisions and know what to do, through emergency management or their own personal use.
Each hurricane is unique, and that's what fascinates me about these storms because each one is taking a little bit different track. It has a little bit different strength. But what I want to come back to is actually our last category 5, Hurricane Michael, where in that case, the Saffir-Simpson scale was great because the biggest threat was the wind. And I know you were part of the assessment team looking back on Hurricane Michael. So what stood out in particular about that storm? Was there anything in particular that, as far as when we were communicating the risks and then what it actually did as it was making landfall? What was Hurricane Michael? Let's go back to Hurricane Michael real quick and talk about what made that storm so unique.
Thanks for that question. Michael, was just a tropical storm down in the Western Caribbean and coming up on the west side of Cuba. And we had a 3-day weekend, Labor Day weekend. Now, how much attention do you think you're going to get for people who've planned for an entire year to go down to the beach during Labor Day weekend? And they planned a long time for it. Now they're not in front of a radio, or they're certainly not going to turn into the news or listen to music, and they're not going to, so getting the word out during that time when last they knew there was this blob in the Caribbean, and at best it was a tropical storm. And now you're telling me to end my vacation? What is this the same thing? What happened? And everything. So having it over a Labor Day, we should outlaw that in the meteorological community. Make sure that hurricanes don't come on 3-day weekends or something like that. So just for future reference, But anyway, having it over Labor Day weekend or a big news event is hard to get people to listen to your message, let alone whatever that message is, let alone it had gone, as I say, again, in less than 50 hours, it went from tropical storm to Cat 5 hurricane. And then it came in. And as I say, I got the tour down there and everything. And along the immediate coast, it certainly was a lot of water that pushed some houses well inland. And we had military bases that were severely impacted in that area as well, which hurts us on a number of fronts. It takes a long time to recover from things like that. Even if people go away and come back, their livelihoods have got to start back up, and everybody's got a story. And when you talk to them later and you go do an assessment, and the eyes get big and they tell you what they believed, and you learn not to contradict or argue with them or anything like that. But I will assure you, I've never talked to one person after a hurricane assessment that their hurricane wasn't the worst one ever. So, and I certainly appreciate that. It's probably the worst night of weather they've ever had in their life, or the worst day of weather they've ever had in their life. And so trying to get people to understand that ahead of time and know what those impacts are. Again, I come back to those impacts, be it the water from the storm surge or that wind. It was a tremendous, and it's unrelenting. I'm not sure how many people have been in a hurricane that listen to this or whatever, but it's not like other storms. And that's why, you started out that it was unique and everything. Well, that's what drives my passion with it. It's not like a thunderstorm that lasts 20 minutes. It's not like a tornado that lasts seconds. This thing is hundreds of miles, if not thousands of miles across. And it's going to take 10, 16, 18 hours or more to come across you. Ask the poor people in the Bahamas, which were flat to begin with, and they had to go through Dorian in 19 and had to live with the Cat 5 over them for 3 days. They had hurricane force winds sustained for 3 days. That's the thing that people don't understand. What does that mean? Sustained. That means it's not like, oh, it's going to let up here any second now. No. That's not going to happen. And when it does, trust me, you do not want to go outside right then, because you got about 20 minutes before it comes back on the other side, just as strong. I rambled on a little bit too long there, Matt, but you got me fired up passion-wise with a great question. Thank you.
No, absolutely. I know what you're talking about with how long those winds last. When I was in the Valley, I dealt with Hurricane Hannah. It was only a Category 1 hurricane, but it was still remarkable how strong the winds were and how long they lasted. I mean, even before the core of the hurricane, the eye wall came on shore, the winds were already cranking. Then you had the eye wall itself, And that seemed to last for a remarkable amount of time. But what people forget is you also have the backside of the hurricane as well. And the winds were still strong on the backside. Even though we'd gotten through the worst, it was remarkable how long the winds lasted. And I think sometimes we are guilty of that in broadcast meteorology. We like to show the models and show the storm coming in. And we talk about the timing, but sometimes we lose context. We show all this data very quickly and we don't really emphasize like how long we're going to. A lot of folks, especially with a lot of these storms slowing down as well, how long folks may very well be dealing with the rain and dealing with the storm surge and dealing with the winds. I do think that's something that always have to remind people, because the long amount of time that you deal with these impacts is significant as well.
And that's where a lot of the damage comes when the wind shifts. Like you've been pushing on a building or a structure for 8 to 12 hours from one direction, more or less. It changes a little bit, but it's just built up and it's just put stress on that building in so many areas. But it's always from that maybe a same side or two of that building, right? And then it goes quiet, and now it comes back from the entire opposite side, and that's when buildings collapse. That's when doors give in. That's when roofs fly off. That's when things all come to pieces according to structures. So it is a very dangerous time. And as that eye moves inland and collapses, my thesis work was on the inland rainfall and from these systems. And so as it collapses, you've gotten bands around the eye, and then as it moves in, well, now you don't have that eye anymore. So you've got two bands in quite succession. So the inland maximum amount of rainfall will come right where that eye collapsed, because you'll have two extreme heavy rain bands go over the same little lucky town. And instead of getting 8 inches of rain, they get 16 inches of rain in that area. And that's where a lot of the floods and the impacts come from that, and the risk to life and property in that area.
You know, Joel, you were talking about personal stories. I just have to throw in too with that. I know I live in Tulsa, but I have a lot of family down in Texas. And when Harvey came through, my dad actually lost his house through that one. And it wasn't that the structure blew away. It was that the winds were just relentless, and they caused, of course, the roof to kind of pop up just a bit. And then it was the flooding, and the entire thing just had to be completely gutted, which is kind of even surprising because there's a Port Aransas, Texas, which was right on the Gulf. So I still can't believe it didn't blow away. But anyways, no, the thing I wanted to ask though too about this was I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, of course, and we were kind of joking about it to begin with. You're like, well, you really deal with a lot of a lot of hurricanes up here, and of course, no, I mean they hit, obviously right along. Bodies of water, but what would you say, I guess, to those that may be listening here from Tulsa or towards the plains, when it comes to hurricanes, we can't let our guard down either, because they can still impact us as well. It might not be the actual hurricane itself, but just the remnants of it. What would you say to those listening in our part of the country?
So thank you for that question. It's a great question. We had a hurricane hit Louisiana past couple of years. We had 4 direct deaths from the wind and the surge in Louisiana. And then it trekked up there to Joe's territory toward northern New Jersey and New York City, where it had over 70 deaths come. And that's from the rainfall. I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina. Hurricane Hugo hits Charleston, South Carolina. I called my parents before it hit and said, "You're going to be without power. The house may survive, but all those big oaks and maples and everything else that are around your house and poplars will not, and you're going to be without power." And sure enough, that's what happened. My hometown was the last place inland that had sustained hurricane force winds, and we're over 250 miles from the coast. So the winds can still be the big part, but what more than likely is going to happen is the heavy rainfall. And that keeps going on and on and on. If you have some kind of boundary that this huge mass of hot, moist air that's coming over your area, and say you had an old frontal boundary that just hung around, or a trough or something like that, that's going to focus that rain. If you have a band of mountains in there, that's going to focus that rain, or some kind of upper level disturbance that's hung around. That's going to focus that rain over you. And you think, oh, well, now it's only 6 inches of rain I heard in northern Louisiana. I don't have to worry about it in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Next thing you know, you got 14 inches of rain. People are dying in your backyard. So the key thing is the impacts, and that's hard to forecast. We got a great team of people throughout the Weather Service that look at those things. So heed those forecasts. The other thing I'll say is a lot of people that I knew or saw the impacts from people's decisions when I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, is that they would evacuate from the coast for a hurricane, come all the way to Raleigh, North Carolina, and get a hotel room next to Crabtree Creek. Well, Crabtree Creek in Raleigh, North Carolina floods if somebody walks by and spits in it, okay? Let alone if you got, a hurricane or remnants of a hurricane coming, so it flooded and people lost lives. So when you moving from Houston, when you're moving for Port Aransas and you're going inland, you might say, I'm going to Tulsa, right? Okay, let's drive to Tulsa and be safe. You're safe from the winds. There are other impacts, right? There's tornadoes, there's flooding rains. So by all means, don't put your life at risk in Tulsa by staying next to the water, next to a river, next to the low side of a dam, next to a place that's a lake that can overflow, right? Don't do those things. You've done nothing to protect your life, even though you've transited hundreds of miles and clogged up the roads for countless numbers of people. You've done nothing to protect your life at that point in time. So it's all about the impacts. And you can still have plenty of those in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as northern New Jersey from a storm that hit Louisiana. You're not out of the woods.
Yeah, we've seen all that. I mean, even here in Virginia, and as you've seen in North Carolina, a lot of the Middle Atlantic, and down to the Gulf Coast, Midwest. I can tell you specifically here in Richmond, Virginia, our 3 greatest floods of record in the modern era have had tropical origins, interacting with some kind of mid-latitude feature, really just wringing out that kind of moisture. So, and unfortunately, we're kind of overdue for that statistically. I do want to take a little bit of a break, let everybody catch their breaths. But when we come back, we want to talk a little bit more about the importance of water, whether that's freshwater flooding or coastal flooding with tropical systems. We're with Joel Cline, the Tropical Program Coordinator at the National Weather Service, here on the Across the Sky podcast. Welcome back to the Across the Sky podcast. I'm meteorologist Sean Sublett at the Richmond Times-Dispatch with the rest of our team from Lee Enterprises across the sky and across the country. We're here with Joel Cline, Tropical Program Coordinator at the National Weather Service in suburban Washington, D.C., talking about tropical meteorology, and that, of course, means hurricanes. Joel, a lot of the graphics that the Hurricane Center has put out over the years continue to improve. But my understanding is that there is still some confusion about how these are interpreted by the public. What kind of things have you learned in that sphere?
So that comes from making mistakes and trying to learn from them. And so we've involved, as I said earlier, social scientists in our team now to do surveys and just ask people what they took from this graphic and what they learned, and did it come out on time for them to make a decision, and did they understand, or what's their understanding of it, and that kind of thing. Everything from storm surge graphics to the basic and most recognized thing with hurricanes, the cone of uncertainty. And so a lot of people think that either means the actual size of the storm when it hits, which it doesn't. It's the potential track of a center of the system, and only 2/3 of the time will that center be within that cone. People don't get that because it can go left, or it can go right, or it can be in the cone. So by definition, 1/3 of the time it's outside the cone. The good news is, through meteorological research, the cone is much smaller today than it was in the late 80s when I was signing my name to the forecast products and having no idea where it was going to go. So, it's a lot better scientifically today than we've ever been in our past. That's the good news. Now, communicating all the threats, all the impacts correctly to where everybody has a clear understanding of what that means is still a work in progress. For example, that cone. People think that if they're not in the cone, then they have nothing to worry about. And that is also not true about that information. So, storm surge graphics, we give ranges on there, 0 to 3, and then you got 3 to 6, 6 to 12. We start getting bigger ranges when you get bigger up there, because a lot of that, instruments fail and all the time in hurricanes. So going back and piecing it together, that's another part of the service assessment team to look at that damage and see what's going on with those kind of things, to try and learn from it and make those products better. So it starts with science, it goes to social science, it goes to talking to a lot of the users, Joe Public, or whether it's emergency manager or somebody that's colonel, somebody from Tyndall Air Force Base or wherever, or the lifeguard out at Brick, New Jersey, that we're trying to talk to see what can help them out, and make their job easier to protect life and property.
Well, is there anything that you could talk about that might be coming soon from either your organization or from the Hurricane Center to help with this? Or is there anything that you could kind of say, well, we're working on X or Y in the coming 1 or 2 years, we're still in development? Or is there anything we should be kind of on the lookout for either this season or the seasons to come that might help with that?
So there is. We're still awaiting results, the final results from all these social science projects that are coming. They fit under 4 main categories, but they will impact things eventually, like the cone or any other of our graphical products. In the meantime, what we're going to do is, when you go to our website, you can go to NOAA, or you can go to weather.gov, or, for hurricanes, you can go to hurricanes.gov and go straight there. So hurricanes.gov, keep that in mind, remember that, and that'll help you out a lot. But just when you click on for the graphics for Hurricane X, and it comes up, now we're working on getting subject matter experts to make a short 2-minute or less video that has a person's face, and they come on there and they say, no, when you're looking at this is what this means, this is what this doesn't mean. And so you get a quick tutorial that you can click on. Each time one comes up, you don't have to click on it, but it's readily available and it'll be right there. And then the longer term, as I said, when these social science projects come to fruition, we'll take that information and try and look at it as well. We're also looking at things like, I'm part of a team that works with NIST, which is another Department of Commerce agency, National Institute of Standards and Technology. They look about how to looking at hurricanes and how to make structures and critical structures, hospitals, schools, government buildings, power companies stay up better and that kind of thing. So they've got social science projects going on as well. And so what are the two say? One, are they telling us the same? Are they telling us something different? And they're looking at Caribbean nations as well. They're looking at U.S. territories like Puerto Rico and the VI as well, from Hurricane Maria that hit down in that area. And so we're getting information from a lot of different places, and we have to synthesize it and meet and talk and learn what that means.
Joe, I know you had one more question before we begin to wrap up.
I was impressed Joel knew about Brick, New Jersey. That was good. Do you know all the towns along the coast, Joel?
I'm pretty decent at geography, but I won't say I know all of them. But do you know all the islands in the South Pacific and the West Pacific? Because I've been to all of them too.
I've been to French Polynesia. I was there last year. I was there for our honeymoon.
Well, next time you go, make sure you take your new best friend.
That's it. Yeah, right. No. Hey, just wrapping up as we look forward into, hurricane season beginning on June 1st. What are you hoping to learn most as we go into and then after this season?
What I'm hoping to learn most is what to do when I'm bored, because I don't want any storms or hurricanes. How about that? So
I agree with you there. That sounds good with me.
I would love to be contemplating what to do with my day, but unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the case. And so we constantly trying to make sure people get prepared. They are coming. They are a tremendously high risk event to life and property. There's a low probability that it'll ever impact you during your lifetime, but if it does, boy, it's the worst weather event you will ever imagine. And I'm speaking from experience, here with being at the site of many hurricanes and going through Cat 5 in the building that I was in at the Hurricane Center in Andrew in 92. It only takes one storm. In 92, there was only one storm or hurricane that made landfall. It just happened that it went right over the building I was in. We had 164 mile an hour sustained winds, blew the radar right off the top of the building, and that'll get your attention. So at any rate, you got to take things seriously. You can go to FEMA, you can go to Red Cross, you can go to hurricanes.gov, and get information about safety and what to do to prepare and learn about what things are. Just like your kids teach you about the batteries and the smoke detectors. Sometimes our kids learn more than us in schools and the tornado drills in schools. Well, we don't do tornado drills at home. A lot of times, maybe they do in Tulsa. I don't know. They should. But a lot of places could take hurricanes a bit more serious with repetition over time and getting prepared. And what does that mean? And what do I need to do? One thing I will tell you that we have learned that was absolutely mind-blowing in the last few years. In the last 5 years, more people have died in hurricanes from carbon monoxide poisoning than they have storm surge. And that is because they run gas-powered generators to keep the power on in their house, and there's obviously no air conditioning or something, and they run it inside their garage, or they run it outside their house with the window open, and the carbon monoxide comes in there. More people have died that way recently than from storm surge, which is the greatest threat. Now, this hasn't caused the highest number of deaths, but think about that one for a little bit.
That's not something that I would have immediately thought of, but you saying that and just thinking things through, how more people have generators now, that it surprises, but it's not shocking. But I think that's an important message to kind of close on. There are other cascading impacts when you think you're doing the right thing by trying to secure your livelihood, to be sure the lights stay on. You have to be mindful of other risks that could come with that. Joel, thank you so much for joining us on the Across the Sky podcast. We're going to turn you loose. Best to you for this hurricane season and the work that you and your folks are doing, both in DC and down in South Florida. So thank you very much, Joel.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure meeting all of you guys, and best of hurricane season to all of you.
Thank you much. And we'll be right back with a little wrap up on the Across the Sky podcast. And welcome back to the Across the Sky podcast. I'm meteorologist Sean Sublett from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Closing thoughts on our conversation with Joel Cline at the National Weather Service Tropical Program Coordination Office there. So many acronyms for the National Weather Service, but doing good work communicating the risks of tropical cyclones, what we call hurricanes, across the United States. Kirsten, let's start with you. What's some of the takeaways from today?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with him. He had a lot of information, very useful information. But I think, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. Hurricanes gain national attention all the time, just with their power and their strength and what it is they can, do. But, like you said, it's something that it can, in a way, impact most parts of the country, including where we are, just with the remnants of that system. Those systems get sucked into the jet stream, and then they just go across the country and continue to dump heavy rain. I we've always known it can be a flood threat for us here in Tulsa, but I guess I never really put two and two together with the fact that, yeah, you probably shouldn't be right next to a creek. I mean, yeah, you probably shouldn't, but there's some people that, unfortunately that's, that happens and then they deal with the flooding risks. So these storms are powerful and they pack a punch, and I think it's always something that people all across the country should be aware of whenever they happen.
And the thing for me is you're more likely to get impacted if there are more storms. And these last two hurricane seasons have just been so active. And I tell you what, I mean, this one's probably going to be an active one too. You got another La Nina setting up. And of course, the above average sea surface temperatures, which are just becoming natural now because of climate change. So, I almost kind of just have this bad feeling now going into hurricane season where after the last couple of years, before you could always say, well, maybe there are going to be some mitigating factors. Maybe this season won't be so bad. But I just have less and less confidence it's going to be a quiet season, that we're probably going to have a lot of storms. When you have a lot of storms, yes, there are plenty that do stay out in open waters, but when you have more storms, it's more likely one's going to make landfall. And when you have more storms making landfall, more people are going to be impacted. So you can't count on saying, well, the chance for one of those landfalling storms to hit me is pretty small. When we have more landfalling storms, like take Louisiana, for example, all the storms they've been dealing with, multiple ones in the same year. So it's now becoming not just, are you going to be hit by a hurricane this year? Could you be hit by multiple hurricanes, which is becoming more and more a reality for people on the Gulf Coast? So just the number of these storms after these last two seasons, it just, gives me this bad feeling going into hurricane season now, where we're probably not going to get out of it without talking about some major impacts.
Yeah, Louisiana has been what's been on my mind a lot these last couple of seasons, not to negate what's been going on in other locations, but the Louisiana coastline, they already have sinking land. They already, as a result, their water level is rising because of planetary warming. There's so many compounding factors there in Louisiana in particular. Joe, go ahead, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, two things. One, I'm still surprised you knew about Brick. It's a nice town here at the shore. But more importantly, he was talking about the indirect impacts from hurricanes. And, if you live along the shore, what happens when a storm might be 500 miles offshore, but you still have rip currents, deadly rip currents for days at a time, the high surf that comes from it. So I think, when we go into hurricane season, if you live along the East Coast or the Gulf of Mexico, you're going to be impacted by a hurricane in some way, shape, or form this year. It might not make landfall. It might not bring heavy rain and storm surge per se, but even something like rip currents or high surf or just even regular coastal flooding sometimes that it can bring is an impact. So, when you're along the shore, it's always good to be cognizant of not just what's happening over your head, but what is happening out to sea. Because, and Sean, I'll talk to you since you're close to the coast here in Virginia. There's times where storms are out near Bermuda and you still have people who might die in a rip current. So, the whole Atlantic hurricane basin is fair game for impacts, along the East Coast.
No, and that's absolutely correct. And that's one of the things I think we're going to find out a lot this year. Back to Matt's point is, we've had two very active seasons back to back. We're in a La Nina, which suggests a third very active season. There is the scientific mind in me that is curious to see how this is going to play out. I always hesitate. People throw the term the new normal around. I don't want to think that this is going to be a situation where, we should expect 18, 19, 20 every year. So I don't think that's where this is going, but it does raise awareness to say the least, because y'all might have remembered the major hurricane drought that we had for a while. That term was thrown around for a long time. We went, more than a decade before having an actual major hurricane make landfall in the United States. And that's completely gone. I mean, that little thing is just a blip in the consciousness now when we talk about tropical meteorology. But yeah, the impacts are here. They're going to be here to stay. To Joe's point, there are a lot of times we have impacts that most people don't know they're even going on. They go to the beach, they go to the shore, the waves are rough. They don't know why. But yeah, there's a hurricane 500 miles away. That kicks up the surf. That produces rip currents, to say nothing of that once a storm makes landfall, 2, 3, 4 days ahead of time, puts down a phenomenal amount of rain over a huge area. So you get the short-term flooding of the streams and creeks, And then you get the major flooding of the longer or those bigger rivers as well. So there are all kinds of impacts at all kinds of levels and extents when it comes to tropical weather, hurricanes, tropical storms. All that folds into the same thing because the amount of water with these systems is truly, truly phenomenal. Any
Hey,
closing
listen,
thought? Yeah, go ahead, Joe. I was going
No.
to say before we close things up, final comments.
Yeah, I was just going to say, 6 inches of moving water is enough to move a car. 12 inches is enough to move an SUV, and 18 inches will move just about anything. So 6 inches of water is not a lot during a tropical system that's coming close to you. So just always good to realize that.
Respect the water, respect the wind for sure.
So, and respect Sean.
And respect the Jersey Shore. Mad respect for my friends there in the Garden State, because that's a busy place in the summer, man. Wow.
Listen, we're rocking, my friend.
It is time.
Memorial Day weekend 2022.
Anything else, Matt? You got anything else, bud?
Yeah, just don't dismiss these tropical storms. Sometimes, if it's not a hurricane, people are like, well, it's just a tropical storm. But again, coming back to this, the threat from the water, especially if it's a slow moving tropical storm, do not discount it. Maybe the winds aren't the strongest, but even tropical storm force winds can still do damage. And you just cannot overlook the fact that these things can dump a lot of rain, and a tropical storm can still spin up some tornadoes as well. So don't dismiss it just because it's not a category 3 or a category 4 or category 5. Because even a tropical storm, I guess it's better than a hurricane, but it can still have major impacts, and you just cannot dismiss even these weaker storms.
Yes, you have to remain aware as we get into tropical season. You don't have to look at the weather maps every 3 hours, but you do need to at least remain aware of what's going on. Kirsten, any final thoughts before we close? Getting the shaking of the head there because the kids are running around, and hi to all the kids there. In Tulsa. So thank you, everybody. So that's it for this week. We appreciate you joining us, and join us next week for another edition of the Across the Sky podcast from Lee Enterprises across the United States.
Best of hurricane season to all of you.